do this morning was I want to share with you something just a drop personal. I was not raised as an observant Jew. That was not my background. And when I first encountered this community, I found certain things that were just absolutely bizarre, as I think any intelligent person would. In other words, anytime you're visiting any foreign culture, you can't, if you're open-minded and you have a critical mind, you can't help but notice certain things about that community which will strike you as very strange because it's a different culture. So during my first encounters, I developed a very long list of things which I find are bizarre about Orthodox Judaism. I think that's not too strong a word. So I'm not going to share with you my whole list because that will take many hours. But what I thought I would do is, this morning I'll just share with you a few of the items. Maybe I'll do 2 or 3 items that I think are very, very strange about the world of these Orthodox Jews. And then I'll show you how I processed those anomalies. And then perhaps that will be instructive for you. Maybe you'll be able to take away some ideas about how to process foreign cultures when you visit foreign cultures. Okay, let's start with this. You cannot have any contact with Orthodox Jews and fail to notice, literally, their obsession with tiny, itsy-bitsy little detail. That's not too strong a word. Does anyone know what time Shabbos started this week? Take a wild guess. If you would say 6:30 or 6:45, you're wrong for sure. What are the odds? It's going to come out to be like 6:31 and 18 seconds on this side of Harnov. On the other side, it's like 19 seconds. Yeah? And they're not kidding. Yeah? If they could calculate out to the 100th of a second, they would. What time does Shabbos end? At 8:42 and 11 seconds. Literally. You look on the calendar, that's what it says. Do you think that's really what God cares about? I mean, like 8:32 and 11 seconds? I understand a day of rest. 8:32 and 11 seconds? Watch this. I probably shouldn't tell you this. Did you figure out that these Orthodox Jews put on their right shoe before their left shoe? I'm not joking. And they tie their left shoe before their right shoe, except if you're a girl, in which case there's 2 different approaches. When they cut their fingernails, I'm not kidding you. When they cut their fingernails, there's an order for cutting their fingernails, yeah? This finger, 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 this finger. And on certain days it's better. I'm not kidding. Now, you hear this sort of thing, and you think, at some point, they got so caught up in the trees, they missed the forest. This is like Judaism for people who have OCD. That's what we're looking at, yeah? So, when you hear that kind of detail, you can't help but think they lost it someplace. Okay. I found their obsession with detail to be, by the way, it's not just a few areas of Jewish law, it's every single area of Jewish law, everything. The most basic things that you've heard about before that actually start to make sense to you. If you dig a little bit deeper, you'll see this kind of detail. When I first encountered Orthodoxy, I had already been a vegetarian for 7 years. And I was a vegetarian basically for moral reasons. So I was interested when the whole controversy broke out over kosher slaughtering. I was very interested in it. It broke out in Europe because they were trying to ban kosher slaughtering in Europe as being inhumane. And what ended up happening was there were independent, non-Jewish groups who came in and did studies and found that kosher slaughtering was not inhumane, and therefore it remained legal in most of Europe. Now, it was interesting. The way they did the studies was they hooked up animals to an EEG, to an electroencephalogram, where they could actually watch the brain activity. And with normal slaughtering, let's say the way they kill most animals where I come from in Los Angeles is the bolt shot. The bolt shot is like a steel ball on the end of a cord that's in a hydraulic gun that fires several times per second and just eats away at the animal's head until eventually enough damage has been done, the animal drops. Usually the animal's not dead at that point, and then they take out chainsaws and just cut the animal to pieces. And during this entire procedure, you can imagine the EEG is going crazy because the animal's in excruciating pain. Then, how do they do the kosher slaughtering? They take a long knife, sharper than any surgical instrument. They check it with a nail. If there's any nick anywhere in the knife, they can't use that knife to do the kosher slaughtering. They take that knife, in one continuous stroke, they sever both of the main lines going up to the brain. Now, those lines have to be severed 50.00% or higher. When they do kosher slaughtering according to Jewish law, this is something, I'm critical of the Orthodox in many ways, but here I got to hand it to them. When they do kosher slaughtering this way, what happens is the blood drops out of the brain before the pain impulse can go from the throat to the spinal cord and up into the brain, which means that the animal never experiences pain. It is physically impossible for an animal that is killed kosher to experience pain. It cannot happen. When they do the EEGs of animals that are killed kosher, they have normal brain activity and then flatline. So I give it to them. Yeah, like they've got it. They have there is no more painless method of slaughtering animals on earth unless you anesthetize the animal, which will only be as painless. Won't be more, it'll be as painless because it's no pain also. But if you anesthetize the animal, you can't eat the meat because at the moment of death, metabolism stops and the anesthetic is frozen in the meat and then you can't eat it. So if you want to eat an animal, the only way to eat an animal that was killed painlessly is if it's kosher slaughtered. So I like that. But now listen to this. I mentioned that the two lines going up to the brain have to be severed 50% or more, 50.00% or more. What happens if one of those two lines is only severed 49.99%? The animal is kosher or it's not kosher. Now, are you telling me that if you severed one of those lines 49.99%, the animal felt pain? I don't buy it, right? This is pure obsession with itsy bitsy tiny little details, right? And that is what you'll find in any Jewish law that you investigate. They are all incredibly detail oriented. Why such an obsession with detail, right? Coming from the normal culture that I come from, that is bizarre. Okay. Take that question, put it on the shelf for just a minute, I'll come back to it. My first encounter with Orthodox Jews was I was doing academic research. I fell into a yeshiva doing academic research. I had to interview Orthodox Jews. That's where you find them. I went to this yeshiva. I had no fluency whatsoever in the lingua franca, so to speak. The people there, although they spoke English, but it was a dialect of English that was sprinkled with Aramaic, Hebrew, and Old French, a bit of Yiddish as well. So I basically couldn't understand anything anyone was talking about. And they gave me a giant volume of the Talmud written in Aramaic, which I couldn't translate, I couldn't even read. But now, I wasn't there to learn Talmud, I was there to learn about the people. And what happened was, they had prayers at 7:30 in the morning in the yeshiva, which I didn't go to because I'm not religious. But at 8:30 they had breakfast, which I did go to. And then at 9 o'clock Talmud study started, and I went to the Talmud study class because I had always wanted to hear, like, what is Talmud study all about? And the Talmud study was beyond belief. It was so exciting. And that they had from 9 to 1. What I didn't realize was that at 1 o'clock, right, as everyone closed their books at the end of that class, someone walked up to the front of the room, went bang on a podium. Everyone grabbed a small book, stood up and started going, so when in Rome, so I grabbed a book and started going, right? Then suddenly everyone went quiet. I went, shh, 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 right? And they're all standing there going, okay, okay. They're praying. And I realize this is not where I want to be. Yeah, but what am I going to do? I can't walk out at this point. I'm trying not to offend these people. I'm a guest in their environment. And I can't get up at 10 minutes to 1 and walk out of the class. That's not going to work. So I strategized that afternoon and realized what I have to do. And I went down to a Jewish bookstore and I bought an English Hebrew prayer book. It was the first edition of a new prayer book that had just come out called Art Scroll. Yeah? And I bought this Art Scroll prayer book and I brought it the next day, and at 1 o'clock when they all broke into divine dialogue, so I popped out my Art Scroll prayer book and I figured, look, I'm here to learn about them, I'll study the things that they're saying. So while they were praying, I was reading through the Art Scroll prayer book. This goes on for like 3 days. After 3 days, there was a little 14-year-old kid who had been watching me, and he walks up to me and he says, "You don't pray right." And I'm like, "Excuse me." And he starts to explain to me. He says, "You're just reading." So I said, "What do you want me to do?" He says, "You have to say the words." Now, I couldn't believe where this was going. I said, "Are you telling me," I was here to discover their culture, "are you telling me that the God that you believe in doesn't know what's in my heart?" So the poor kid got all flustered and ran away. Yeah, but don't have mercy on him, because he comes back a minute later with this giant folio-sized book, slams it down the table in front of me, starts pointing at it and saying, "It says here you gotta say the words," right? At which point the rabbi saw what was happening, grabbed him, carried him off, but it was too late, yeah? Because he had already confessed, they think you have to say the words. Now, what is this, neo-paganism? Yeah? What kind of a God do they believe in, that if I didn't say it, I didn't articulate it, I didn't pray? Why such an obsession with detail? Why do they think you have to say the words? This is bizarre. Third question, then we'll be out of time. Third question is like this. I have 100 of these. I'm just giving you some samples today. I couldn't communicate with these people in the yeshiva, not just because they spoke an interesting dialect of English, but because we come from completely different cultures. And so there was really no one for me to talk to. It was all observation, except for one rabbi. There was one rabbi in the building who I really got excited about. I asked him a question, and he must have known that I was UCLA, Harvard educated, and so he answered in perfect American university. The guy was bilingual. He spoke yeshivish and university. And the answer that he delivered was so deep, and it was so relevant, I was just thrilled. So I thought maybe he got lucky. So I asked him some more questions. And every time I asked him a question, I got something that was an intellectual steak. I don't know how to describe it, yeah? So exciting. So I wanted to talk to him a lot, but everyone else liked to talk to him also. He was hard to get to. So what I used to do is at 8:30 in the morning when he would eat breakfast in the yeshiva, I would go and pummel him with all my questions. And all my questions had essentially the same format, which is, Rabbi, why do I have to keep this mitzvah? Why do I have to keep that mitzvah? And every morning he would answer. And every morning I would get the most satisfaction out of these answers. I felt so good and inspired when I walked away until one morning when I asked him one of those questions, and he looked across the table and he smiled. And he said, Kelman, you keep asking the wrong question. At which point, I was suspicious to begin with. All my radar went up. I said, what do you mean? He said, you keep asking, why do I have to keep this mitzvah? Why do I have to keep that mitzvah? And then, with a big smile, he looked at me and said, don't you understand? He said, I'm quoting, our mantra, our theme song, he said, is, we do it even if we don't understand it. I thought, you're a kook. Okay. Now, I was not surprised that if you scratch an ultra-Orthodox Jew, you find a religious fanatic underneath. I suspected that all along. What confused me was, I'm a fairly good judge of people. I really believed that he got me. I really felt that he understood where I was coming from. And when he answered me with such relevance every morning, I understood he was talking to me, the university scholar. He got me. What I didn't understand is, why would any intelligent Orthodox Jew, even if he believed it, confess that we do it even if we don't understand it? Didn't he realize in that moment I was going to lose complete and total respect for him? Out the window, gone. Why would he say it? Why are they so obsessed with detail? Why do they think you have to say the words? Why would they admit we do it even if we don't understand it? Fast forward the whole movie about 10 years. I'm here in Jerusalem. I found enough of value in the Orthodox community to continue my pursuit. I discovered here a scholar who was a leader in the Orthodox Jewish community, an amazing man. When I first met him at this lecture I'm about to describe, he was 75 years old. I came to the lecture. I'm the only person in the lecture coming from my background. Everybody else, it's a room about twice the size of this room, filled with 150 people. When I walked in, they told me there's not going to be room to sit down, stand against a wall. But it was ridiculous. I walked in, all the walls were filled, yeah? People were standing on each other's feet. I went and stood on someone's feet who was standing on someone's feet. And this old man with a white beard gets up off the bench, sits down on a stool, and he starts to speak. And it was part of a long winter series, and it became clear in the first few minutes that this long winter series had the theme of the entire purpose of Judaism. The whole purpose of the Torah is to craft a human being who will be expert at intimacy. So I hear that, I fall off my chair. Everybody else in the room is nonplussed. They're all accepting it as if that's, right, completely normal. He gives this entire lecture. I wish I had a transcript of the lecture and I could read it to you. What I can do is I can tell you what happened to me as a result of that lecture. I walked out, my whole perspective on this thing called Judaism changed. I've been doing marriage counseling. I shouldn't say marriage counseling because I counsel people who are not married. I've been doing couple counseling for about 30 years. So at this point, I've counseled literally hundreds of couples. I have never once had a couple come, most of the time, 99% of the time the couples come to me, they come to me because their marriage is on the rocks, or their relationship is on the rocks, it's breaking up. I've never once had a couple come to me whose relationship was in trouble because they disagreed over some major issue, yeah? I'm a liberal, she's a conservative, I want out. I never heard such a thing, right? I never even heard, I'm Jewish, she's not Jewish, get me out of here. I never heard that, ever, not once. Now, I imagine it might happen out there, but statistically, those sorts of instances are minuscule. The vast majority of people who come to me have relationships that are breaking up over things that are so small, so picayune, that if you heard about it, you would say, these people are not well. I had a couple come to me. He was a physician. And not just a physician, he was very health-oriented, but not just health-oriented. He also was into nutrition, but not just nutrition. He believed that refined sugar was poison. And so he would never eat refined sugar. When he married his wife, he discouraged her from eating refined sugar, but she thought it was like a joke, so she ignored him. Then they had kids. And he kept telling his wife, like, I don't really feel comfortable with you feeding the kids refined sugar. And she thought that was funny. Until one day, he blew a fuse. They had already had, I think at this point, like 3 kids. He blew a fuse, and he said to her, you are poisoning my children. And in order to protect them, if you continue to do this, I am going to divorce you. So she was like, you're kidding. And he's, no, I'm serious. So she said, I didn't realize it was such an issue. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. And everything was fine for a few months until he caught her smuggling into the home Cheerios. And that was it, yeah? He filed for divorce. They came to me because one of the things that I do is sometimes I'll help couples shield their children from the noxious effects of the divorce, and they wanted me to buffer the children, give them some advice how to protect the children. So they'd come to me for counseling. So I wanted to help, but here you have a couple who's getting divorced over Cheerios. Yeah? Now you hear this and you think he's insane, but he seems sane in every other way, yeah? I had a couple who came to me. This was a tragic story. It started tragic, it ended up okay, but it started tragic. I knew both of them before they met each other. Very, very sweet people, nice young couple. They just got married. I attended the wedding. A couple weeks later, I see him. He's got a scruffy beard, and he's got big black rings under his eyes. He looks terrible. And I said to him, is everything okay? What's wrong? And he said to me, I'm gonna divorce her. I said, you're divorcing her? Why? I know the girl, she's a sweetheart. Why are you gonna divorce her? He says, she doesn't like the beard. I said, you're kidding. He said, no. He said, I started growing a beard, she doesn't like the beard. So I said, you are divorcing your wife over a beard? I said, give me a knife. I will cut your beard or I will cut your throat. Are you crazy? What are you doing? Cut your beard. So he says, no, it represents something much larger. Now, this is always what they say in my office. It represents something much larger. If you would sit in my office, you would think that crazy people are attracted to me. Because everybody who comes into my office is getting divorced or breaking up a relationship over something which is so picayune, so silly that you just let it go, forget about it, it's so small. And they always say, no, it represents something much larger. And if you think I attract crazy people, watch this. If there's anybody in this room who was involved in a long-term relationship and recently broke up, if I asked you to publicly state what the issue was that you broke up over, you would be embarrassed. Because they all break up over little picayune, itsy-bitsy, tiny little things. And it seems like insanity, but that's the rule. Now, of course, they always say it represents something bigger, but the reality is it's tiny things. All relationships, almost all relationships, crash over little, tiny, itsy-bitsy details. And more than that, in case you think that you may have discovered a rule here, watch this. 1% of the time, a couple will come to me, and everything's going great. And I start to investigate, why is everything going great? And what do you think I find? Wait, I'll tell you a story. A very cute couple came to me, adorable. They called for an appointment. For some reason, my wife gave them an appointment in my house instead of my office. And when they arrived at my house, I was on the phone. So my wife welcomed them in. She brought them into the kitchen, and our kitchen had a sliding wooden door that separated off from the rest of the house, and she brought them into the kitchen so they could have privacy, and she closed the door. Then she came and she got me, and she said, they're here. So I got off the phone. I did what I always do, which is I went over to the door, and I lightly knocked before I went in. Then I opened up the door, but they must not have heard me knock, because I'll just say they were very busy. So I didn't want to interrupt anything, so I quietly closed the door, yeah. Then I knocked again much louder. I waited a moment, I opened the door. Now they had moved into 2 chairs, which was a good sign, yeah. And then I came and I said, how can I help you? And they're all giggly. So I said, how can I help you? So she says to me, well, we want to get some advice for our marriage. And I said, you know, to be honest, I think your marriage is doing just fine. I said, actually, maybe you can give me some advice. So they said, no, really, we want to get some advice. So this is actually a very wise thing to do, and I advise couples to do this. I told my own kids to do this, right? Before you get married, when you get married, you should go off, you should talk to somebody who's good at it and get some good advice. So I said, fine, I'm happy to help you. And what I did was I started asking some diagnostic questions. I developed over the years some diagnostic questions which allows me to extract an enormous amount of information in a very short period of time. So I asked them one question. I'll tell you what the question is, but then I can never use it on you. Yeah, these are all trick questions. So I asked, tell me something. Do you think your spouse loves you? People are expecting the opposite, the reciprocal of that question. I say, do you think your spouse loves you? So they're very cute, right? He looked at her and said, oh yeah. And she looked at him and said, oh yeah. So I said, great. I said, tell me something. I turned to him and I said, what makes you think that she loves you? So he was really caught off guard, and he became defensive, and he said, sometimes when I come home at night and I walk in, and she's in the living room and she looks up and she sees me, she smiles. I said, that's it? So he was like very defensive, and he said, no, sometimes she makes me a cup of tea. So I said, that's it, a smile and a cup of tea, and that's how you know that she loves you? I turned to her and I said, what makes you think that he loves you? She thought for a minute, and then she started to laugh. So I said, what? So she said, this morning, when he left me a little note on the refrigerator with 3 words. Okay, I didn't ask which 3 words, because there's many combinations I could make up, yes? But nevertheless, that's amazing. I said to them, that's what makes a relationship soar? A smile? A cup of tea? 3 words on the refrigerator? And the answer is, yeah. That's what makes a relationship soar. All relationships crash or skyrocket based on attention to tiny, itsy, bitsy little details. I found this consistently over hundreds of couples, and I will tell you why I believe. You can argue on me, but this is why I believe it is. If somebody notices the big things, that doesn't mean that they actually care about the other person, because how can you miss the big things? If I just celebrated my 31st anniversary. If I remember, it's our 31st anniversary, that doesn't mean that I'm in love with Chana. Because how can you miss the 31st anniversary? It's an elephant in the middle of the room. But if I remember that 31 years ago, last week, I met her for the first time. And I remember when I said, where do you want to go? She said, let's go for fish. And I remember at the restaurant, when the waiter brought the menu, she said, no, I don't need to look at it, I'll take salmon. And I remember that night she told me she doesn't like chocolate. She likes carob. And I remember that night she told me that she loves flowers, and her favorite flower are roses, but not red roses. She likes yellow roses, and she likes a lot of that white poof stuff that they put in the top, and she likes a lavender ribbon. And on my 31st anniversary, when we go out and we sit down, the waiter doesn't bring the menus. He just right away brought the salmon. And then he came back a few minutes later with the 31 yellow roses with a lot of the white poof stuff and a lavender ribbon. If I do that, that means I love her. Because otherwise, why would I have remembered the lavender ribbon? If you really care, then you notice the details. And it turns out that yes, all relationships rise or fall based on how attentive that human being is to tiny little itsy bitsy details. I have several bestsellers out, but I have an idea for a book that would outsell all of my other books. It's an ingenious idea. It's a self-help book, literally self-help book for relationships. And here's how it works. You buy the book. The book has got exercises which force you, trains you to focus in on detailed preferences, little tiny detailed preferences. And the book will have dozens, hundreds of these exercises, 400, 500, 613 of them. The book's already been written. The rabbi with the long white beard explained that's why there are 613 categories of Jewish law, which include thousands and thousands and thousands of tiny little itsy bitsy details. Because if you're going to try to massage the human mind to create somebody who will be expert at relationship, they must train in attending to little tiny itsy bitsy details. But why do you have to say the words? Over the years, I've had many interests in psychology. My favorite area of psychology is the psychology of sex differences. In the psychology of sex differences, my specialty is linguistics. I'm fascinated by the way that men and women use language differently. I could talk to you about that for an hour, but not right now. We don't have time. One thing I will point out is one of the significant differences in the way that men and women use language is not the number of words they use during the day, contrary to popular belief. Yeah, there's a widespread belief that women use more words during the day than men. It's not true. On average, in any particular culture, men and women use the same number of words. But what we do find cross-culturally is that men and women use those words differently, and specifically, men tend to speak when there's a logistical issue that needs to be resolved. When there's a problem that requires attention, men will speak. When there is no problem requiring attention, men tend to go silent. So masculine language looks like, excuse me, could you bring that over to me, please? You're gonna pay the water bill? No, I'm making dinner tonight. All of that is masculine language. It gets things done. This causes problems because men tend to go silent as soon as there's not a problem to solve. So the woman comes home and she says, I had this problem at work today, and there was tension between me and the boss, and then we worked it out, and I felt so much better. How do you feel about that? And he says to her, good. And then she says, but then later on, this friend of mine and I had this great idea, and then we worked it, and we worked on it, and we did it together, and we felt such triumph when we actually were successful. And he says, wow. And at a certain point, she wants to grab him by the collar and shake him and say, talk to me! Now, why does she care? Why does it make a difference to her? The answer is because for women, language means something else. From the time that women are little girls, they are very sensitive to their position in what I call love space. That is, a woman is sensitive to the smallest movements into a relationship, a closer relationship, or out of a relationship. A woman will notice if she's getting closer to someone by microns. Emotional distance of microns she will pick up in a relationship. By the way, men also notice if they're becoming more or less distant, but instead of measuring that distance in microns, by men we have to measure it in light years. Yes? You're like, oh, you want a divorce? Is there something wrong? Yes? With women, because they are so sensitive to whether or not they're getting closer to somebody or moving further away from somebody, they discover certain movements that they can make which will propel them into a deeper relationship with somebody, make them care more about that person, make them love more. And when women want to love more, they'll make these moves. One of the key moves is women intuitively sense that when you want to draw close to somebody, you should give to them. The more that you give to somebody, the more that you care about them. And the more precious the thing that you give to them, the more that you care about them. And the most precious thing you can give to somebody is when you open yourself up and you share yourself with them. When I open my mouth and I articulate and tell you what's happening inside of me, that makes me feel close to you. Often, a woman will speak not for the sake of communicating technical data, but in order to feel close to the person that she's speaking to. Watch this. I'm speaking here to a group of 100% women. Now, I want to ask you as women, have you ever been involved in a conversation with another woman, and that woman told you the exact same detail in that conversation twice? Has that ever happened to you? Ever 3 times? Ever seen 2 women walking down the street and they're both talking simultaneously? What is that? What are they doing? So the answer is, it's not that they're not trying to communicate. It's that they're excited and they want to draw close to each other, and so they talk to each other, because the more that you talk to the other, the closer you feel to the other. In Judaism, we also find masculine and feminine language. Masculine meaning that we find language that is purely functional, versus we find language that is more relationship-oriented. So, for example, these Orthodox Jews think that the world does not belong to them. They think the world belongs to God. And so, for example, if they want to eat something, an apple. This apple doesn't belong to me, but I want to eat the apple. So I need to ask, can I please have your apple? So they make a blessing before eating the apple. Can I please have the apple? And they move the apple from God's possession to their possession. That's very functional. That's pure masculine speech. Where do you find pure feminine speech in Judaism? So I discovered it because this elderly sage gave a course, a beautiful course. There were 5 of us in this group, and he spoke to us about how to be better husbands. And he gave us the craziest, most counterintuitive advice. Every night when he was speaking, I was thinking, this is ridiculous. And then he would say, go home and practice that. And the next week, my wife would say, go back, learn more, yeah? Fine. So one night, he gets up in front of us, and he said that if a couple's not spending private time together 2 to 3 times a week, their relationship is headed for a crash. Now, when I heard this, I was so confused, because it was the first thing he said which had made sense in 20 weeks. Everything else he told me was crazy. This actually made sense, which means I knew I wasn't understanding him properly. So I walked up to him after the class and I said to him, Rabbi, when you say I should spend private time with my spouse, what do you mean? At which point he looked at me like, wow, you're a bigger idiot than I thought. So I said, no, I understand what I think is private time, but what do you think is private time? So he said to me, tell me something. You ever take your wife out to a restaurant? So I said, yeah, sure. He said, the next time that you take your wife out to a restaurant, he said, find a restaurant where there are none of your students, which was not the easiest thing at the time. I had a couple thousand students just in the city. Find a restaurant where there are none of your students. He said, set up the chairs right across from each other. Tell the maitre d' you want to be seated right across from each other, 180 degrees. And then he said, throughout the evening, you should whisper. So I said to him, why? So he said to me, don't you feel how small the room becomes when you whisper? So I said, yeah. So I tried this, yeah? I did the whole thing. I found a restaurant where there were for sure not gonna be any of my students, yeah? Little place. I told the maitre d', I want to be seated right across from the girl, yeah? Not a problem. And then I took her out, and throughout the evening, I whispered. Okay, don't do this unless you're married, yes? Extremely effective. Now, I went back to him, and I said to him, where on earth did you get that? Like, I was sure he was like reading psychology books in the bathroom. Where did you get that? So he said, I got it in the Code of Jewish Law. I'm like, yeah, right, where? Laws of dating? You know, like, come on. So he says, no, right here. And he pulls off the Code of Jewish Law, opens it up, puts it down in front of me, laws of prayer. He says, it says right here, when you want to create an intimate moment with your God, what do? He says, you take 3 steps back from the whole world. Find a restaurant where there's none of your students. Then he said, you take 3 steps forward, sit right across from her, and throughout the evening, you should whisper. He said, why do you whisper? How loud would you speak if you knew that her ear was right next to your mouth? And he said, and why do you have to talk? He said, because God is head over heels in love with you. And he just wants you to join him in that relationship. And the hottest organ of intimacy in the entire human body is right here. The more that you open up and the more that you speak, the more that you fall in love. I wish there was more time for stories. I have a guy, he came to me. He came for counseling, boiling over with anger, so upset. I said, what's wrong? He said, I fell in love. I said, Mazel tov, what's the problem? He said, I'm too young. He's 35 years old. It's like, so what do you mean too young? Well, he wanted to make a certain amount of money before he met the girl, and he met the girl before he made that amount of money, so he's all upset. So I said, who are you upset about? You're the one who did it. He said, I didn't do anything. I said, you certainly did something. I said, where did you meet her? He said, at the office. I said, what did you do? Nothing, we just talked. I said, idiot. Yeah? Right? That's how you fall in love. Why such an obsession with detail? Because all relationships rise or fall based on attention to little tiny itsy bitsy details. Why do you have to say the words? Because this is the mechanism for falling in love. You open up and you say what's happening inside of you. That's how you fall in love. But what was that rabbi thinking? Why did he say, we do it even if we don't understand it? Didn't he realize I was going to lose total respect for him? My wife is the youngest of 4 kids. My father-in-law moved from Germany in the middle of the Holocaust. He escaped in the middle of the Holocaust. He came to America. He wanted to start a better life for himself. He found something beautiful there that was very wholesome called Boy Scouting, right? Leave the world cleaner than you found it, be thrifty, be honest. It had all these good ethics. My father-in-law said, this is what I want for my children. He and my mother-in-law had a little baby boy. When that boy was old enough, my father-in-law put him in Boy Scouting. My father-in-law became the Boy Scout troop leader. A few years went by, they had another boy. When he was old enough, they put him into Boy Scouting. By then, my father-in-law was the head of all of Boy Scouting in Los Angeles. A few years later, they had another boy. When he was old enough, they put him into Boy Scouting. They now had 3 boys in Boy Scouting. My father-in-law had become the head of all of Boy Scouting in California. Then a few years later, they were done having kids. A few years later, whoops, they had an accident, and they had a little girl, Hannah. And when Hannah was old enough, she saw the boys doing the cross-country bike trips and the survival training, and she said, Daddy, I want to be a Boy Scout. And my father-in-law said to her, sweetie, you can't be a Boy Scout because you're a girl. But he said, you could be a Girl Scout. So my father-in-law enrolled her in Girl Scouting, and while the boys were doing the survival training, the cross-country bike trips, she was selling cookies. And she was so upset. And she came back to him and she said, it's not fair. And he said, you know, you're right, it's really not the same. And he's a very honest and good person. And my father-in-law, said to her, listen, pull on a pair of blue jeans, put on a t-shirt, tuck your hair up into a baseball cap. Don't tell anybody you're a girl, you're a Boy Scout. Come with me. Yeah? And my wife became a Boy Scout. Okay, now here's what I discovered. I discovered that there are advantages and disadvantages in marrying a Boy Scout. Okay. The advantage of marrying a Boy Scout is that Boy Scouts don't need very much. She grew up her whole life camping, and so she's not very materialistic. Like, she's very, very simple in what makes her happy. She doesn't need a lot of stuff. The advantage of marrying a Boy Scout is they don't need very much. The disadvantage of marrying a Boy Scout I could describe in this way. The time I met her, I had a very successful business running. I had cash in pocket. I would say to her, Hannah, I want to buy you something. What do you want? You want perfume? You want jewelry? You want clothes? Let's go shopping, right? But the disadvantage of marrying a Boy Scout is they don't need very much. So she would look at me and she'd say, no, I just want to be with you. And I say, no, I'm serious. I want to buy you something. What do you want? No, I just want to be with you. And it would make me crazy. Okay, now over the years, I have actually discovered a few material things, gifts that I can go into a store and I can buy for her, and she likes it so much it makes her giggle. Like Hannah likes carob. And Hannah likes the yellow roses with a lot of the white poof stuff and the lavender ribbon. One day, I'm teaching my class on intimacy here at Neve Yerushalayim. It was part of my 30-week series. And I'm giving the class, that day's class was on giving into irrational requests. For some reason, people in the West think that you should not cooperate with your spouse's irrational requests because it's like giving into insanity. And I had to explain to the group that a human being is not a cerebrum, and that people have psychological needs, they have emotional needs. We give in to irrational requests. Unless it's self-destructive or destructive, we give in to irrational requests. We take care of our spouse. So I'm giving this whole lecture about giving into irrational requests, and there's a knock on the door. Hadassah, the secretary from downstairs, comes up. She says, I'm so sorry for interrupting. Urgent message from your wife. She hands me a folded piece of paper. I open up the piece of paper, and it says, Labe, please, double underline, on the way home from work, can you pick up 2 bags of seaweed? So I close this piece of paper, I stick it into my pocket, I finish giving my class on giving into irrational requests, right? I then walk down the hall. As I'm walking down the hall, I'm thinking, if a man knew nothing about relationships, how would he respond to that note? She never justified why she wanted seaweed, right? And I can picture the guy, like, she didn't tell me why she wants it. He gives one last try, right? He dials the phone, right? She doesn't answer the phone call, and he says, I'm not gonna buy her the seaweed. Okay, now, if a man responds that way, the problem is not that Hannah forgot to say why she wanted the seaweed. The problem is he knows nothing about relationship. What actually happened, I walked down the Neve Hill. I walked into a makolet, and I said, could I please have a couple bags of seaweed? At which point he said to me, I won't even repeat what he said to me, yes? But he said he didn't have any, yes? And he said, you got to go into the health food store in the middle of town. So I said, fine. Now you have to picture the scene. I love this lady to pieces. And I know that there's certain things that she loves, but this never occurred to me. So I'm so excited I'm on the bus, I'm gonna get seaweed for Chana. Fine, I get off the bus, I go into the health food store, I said, can I please have a couple bags of seaweed? He says, oh, I'm so sorry. What's wrong? He says, I just sold my last 2 bags. I said, oh. He said, but don't worry, there's a health food store another few blocks down. I said, could you call them, please? He said, yeah, just a minute. He goes and picks up the phone. Yeah, I've got a guy here, he wants 2 bags of seaweed. Yeah, you got it. I said, tell him to hold it for me. He wants to know if you'll hold it for him. Yeah, you'll hold it for him? Okay, I'm gonna tell, by that point, I was out the door. I'm sprinting down, I'm running down the office street. You have to picture the scene. Right? I come barreling into the next health food store. I said, I'm the seaweed guy. He says, calm down, yeah? So he puts the 2 bags of seaweed on the table. You want anything else? I said, no. Oh, look at that. And on the counter, he's got these trays. And the trays are filled with different kinds of Care bars. I said, you know what? Actually, I'll take 3 of these, and I'll take 3 of these, and I'll take 3 of these, 3 of these, and I'll take 3 of these. He says, anything else? I said, no, that'll do it. He wraps it all up in a bag. He hands it to me. I grab the bag. I pay. I take the change. I walk out. As I walk out, I realize, no. I go back down the block. I go into the flower store. No, not red roses. I need yellow roses. No, put a lot of that white poof stuff in there, yeah? No, not pink. Lavender ribbon, yeah? I get the whole thing. I go back to my house, right? I live a block from here. Han opens the door, and I said, hi. Now, why did I do that? She never told me why she wanted the seaweed. So why did I buy it for her? And the answer is not. The answer is not that I don't care why she wants the seaweed. Because when you love somebody, you want to crawl around inside their head and discover everything about them. So I'm dying to know why Hannah wants seaweed. But I'm not going to refuse to buy it for her until she can justify it to me. I love her. So if she says she wants seaweed, that's enough for me. When that rabbi looked across the table with a big smile and said, don't you understand, we do it even if we don't understand it? It's not that he forgot that I was UCLA Harvard educated. It's that he mistakenly thought that even though I had been to UCLA and Harvard, I might still have a heart left. He was talking relationship. I was talking philosophy. Okay, here's what just happened. I just showed you that there are certain things about the culture of the ultra-Orthodox that strike me as bizarre, because I come from a normal culture. But in my normal culture, the highest priority is achievement, not connection and closeness. And looking through the eyes of my culture, therefore, the foreign culture which I was visiting looked bizarre in 100 different ways. And what I learned over the years is that when I see something in this system that seems strange, that's where I have the most to learn. That's where the deepest wisdom is buried. And that's been the game that I've been playing now for the last 30-something years, is finding those little elements that are bizarre and then discovering the treasure that's hiding underneath. So as you go on your journey, I'll give you the souvenir, yeah? Look for those things that are bizarre. Yeah? Dig deep, try to understand, enjoy, and take advantage of this amazing system for creating spectacular relationships in your life. Okay, have a good day.
All English lectures are available online at hijdebroot.com.